helping people cope with and overcome life's challenges. This is Life Transformations with Michael Hart, certified Christian counselor and director of Ottawa's Elim Counselling Services.
Hi, I am Michael Hart, director of Elim Counselling Service, a Christian counseling ministry in Ottawa, Ontario. And I want to thank you for listening to this edition of Life Transformation, a Christian counseling radio show where chains are broken and lives are transformed. If you're not familiar with Elim Counseling, you can learn more about us at www.elimcounselingministry.com. Elim provides professional counseling from a Christian perspective for individuals, couples, and families. With me in studio today is Blaine Bender. Blaine will be sharing his remarkable story of how God changed him from being an extremely pessimistic person to a person who now has a balanced and generally positive outlook about his future. Welcome, Blaine. It's a pleasure having you here with us in studio today.
Hi, Michael. It's my pleasure, too, to be here.
Blaine, why don't you start by giving the listeners some background information about yourself?
Well, I'll give you a brief synopsis. I grew up living between my grandfather's house and my mom's and stepfather's house until the time I was 13. My grandfather was a Pentecostal minister and a fire and brimstone Pentecostal minister. And my stepfather was a very secular man, at heart a beautiful man, great work ethic, and a very honest man. But he never had a father himself, so he really didn't have any experience being a father. And he abused alcohol terribly, and he himself was a very negative person.
Okay, so you grew up around a lot of negativity in your household growing up with your father.
Yes, but my stepfather,
your
definitely,
stepfather,
yes.
But you had some positive influence coming in from your grandfather.
With my grandfather, very positive, and I mean, it's the root of who I am. But if you know, being that kind of minister back in the 60s and late 50s, I ended up being very legalistic.
Okay.
I got that from, not necessarily from him, but that's what I took from it.
Okay.
So,
So there were some legalistic beliefs that you grew up with. What were the circumstances that led to you coming to see me when you came to counseling for the first time? What can you give the listeners some ideas about where you were when you came in?
Sure. For years, I'd always been on a roller coaster ride with depression. Sometimes mild, hard to rate it. But up and down, sometimes on a weekly basis. I myself abused alcohol, so that didn't help. And I worked. I was a fanatic for work. Most of my life, I worked 60 to 100 plus hours a week. And that doesn't help that situation much either. When I first came to see you, Michael, I had a very close friend who had passed away, and it seemed to be a trigger point that sent me to a deeper level. Not so much of depression, but it was the first time I had experienced anxiety, and the doctor actually had said it's a little more than anxiety, you're having panic attacks. And I had had 2 panic attacks along with a spiral down into depression. So she treated me for that, and then we got your name from a friend, and that's how I ended up seeing you.
Right, so you were going through a lot emotionally. Tell us a little bit more about your emotional state. You were having panic attacks, but what else were happening in terms of sleeping patterns and stuff like that?
Well, it started, it was about about 3 weeks before that, maybe a month even. I wasn't getting any sleep. I wasn't able to sleep. There was really nothing on my mind. I was just awake. It was, maybe to give you an example, it was like at night, it would be like I had about 5 or 6 coffees and just lying awake thinking. And of course, with my thought pattern, the way I was, naturally not a very half full sort of guy. I was a negative guy. So when I was thinking late at night, I had a lot of negative thought patterns that seemed to be grabbing hold.
Right. So, Blaine, you're also a very strong believer. You attend church regularly. You're very involved in your church life. What was it like for you as a believer to be struggling with these emotional issues, and how did this impact your faith?
Well, at times at times it definitely brought me back to my faith without question. At times it left me with lots of questions, why I had to go through it constantly. And at this time, being as low as I was left wondering if it was ever gonna get better,
Right.
or if I would have to struggle with that same pattern the rest of my life.
Right. Okay, so you have been struggling with negative thinking for a long time, very pessimistic, and as I understand, when you came in for that first session, can you tell us a little bit more? What was your outlook, the prospect for change? What did you believe? What was your opinion when you came in that first time? Your attitude, I mean.
Well, what I believed was that definitely I needed some help some way or another, because I had never been that low before, and I'd never experienced a panic attack before, and I wouldn't wish it on anybody else. And when I came to your office, knowing that you were a Christian-based counseling, it was not satisfying, but it was a relief. I had some counseling before, and the counselor was good, and somewhat similar to the techniques you use too, but it wasn't faith-based. And what I found with yours, using the faith and the word, and was a big help, and it was very comforting to know.
Okay.
That's what I was going into.
Right. So you took comfort from the fact that you were
Yes.
getting counseling in a setting that was not going to ignore your scriptural beliefs, your biblical foundation, but would incorporate biblical principles in helping you to become well.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, so during our counseling sessions, Blaine, we looked we used a number of different techniques, and I saw you for quite a while. Were there any particular technique that you found to be really useful that you could share with the listeners today?
Well, definitely the thought sheet that you gave me to use. It took a while for me to get accustomed to using it, but being the negative thinker that I was, and
it took a while to get you sold on it. That it was,
and for your listeners, the thought starts, and it's biblical too. The thought starts off as a little seed, and it just grows. And I was starting off with the negative thought, and so it would just grow and grow and grow. And with the thought sheet, the record sheet that you gave me, and the way it is set out, you can stop that. And it may not stop in the first or second column, but you can stop it in the third or fourth or fifth column. You can actually see it, where you can actually see it if you let it go, where it'll grow, where if you stop it, you can rethink the situation,
right,
and put a more positive attitude on it. You can stop the negative. It doesn't come naturally at the beginning, and even at times now, it still doesn't come naturally, but using it was a big part of the help that I got.
Corinthians talk about taking thoughts captive, and that's exactly what we try to achieve with the thought record sheet, because a lot of times when people are struggling with negative thoughts, the thoughts are coming so rapidly to your mind that you don't have time to process the thoughts to see whether or not they're rational. But in the thought record sheet, what we were able to do, Blaine, was to slow down that thought, write it down, and to begin to assess whether or not you had good reason to be worrying the way that you did, or whether or not you were worrying for things that didn't warrant worrying about. So when we looked at your thought pattern, Blaine, I think we identified that your maladaptive, your way of thinking was largely what we called in counseling circles negative prediction. Can you tell our listeners about what were some of the things that you were predicting negative outcomes for in your life?
Well, it was constant. I give you an easier way, and this may not seem big to a lot of people, but I give you an idea how my thought patterns worked. And I'm going to go to the golf course.
Okay.
Excuse me. Because anybody who's played golf knows that it's about 75-80% mental. And if you approach the ball at any time with a negative thought, that maybe you're going to put it in the bush, or you're going to pull it right, you're going to put it left, you're 99% of the time you're going to do that. And when I golfed, and I love golf, and I golfed a lot, when I approached the ball, I automatically thought, how am I going to mess this up? That's the first thought that came to mind. And it would come over and over. There's trees on the right. There's water on the left. There's you got the wrong iron. You got the wrong club. And sure enough, I would turn that into a bad shot. Therefore, after that, getting somewhat angry and then carrying that over into the game, and it would just ruin the game and ruin the environment for the people around me. And I carried that same attitude with big decisions in my life, and it froze me at times from doing a lot of things, because things like buying a house when I was younger, I would think, oh, what if I lose my job? Oh, what if I can't afford the payment? What if something happens to the house? And so it would freeze me at times in my life, that thought pattern, from doing things that a lot of people just do every day of their life, and they don't worry about, well, if that happens, they just say, if it happens, and we'll deal with it. And I had it all burnt down before I even looked at the house to buy. So
you were predicting a lot of negative outcomes, and as a result, you ended up, using the golf course analogy, you ended up fulfilling the things that you feared the most. That's a very common phenomenon with negative thinking, that we have. It produces what is known as self-fulfilling prophecy. If you think you're going to fail at something and you tell yourself, I'll never do good at this thing, or I am definitely going to make a mess of it, the tendency is that attitude results in you making a mess of the situation. So it's self-fulfilling prophecy. I'd just like to, if you're just joining us today, you're listening to Life Transformation, an Elim Counseling radio show, and I am your host, Michael Hart, Director of Elim Counseling. I'm speaking with Blaine Bender, who is sharing how God has changed him from being a very pessimistic person to be a person who now has a more balanced and positive outlook about life. So we have been talking about how we were able to help you overcome your negative way of thinking by using a therapeutic tool known as the thought record sheets. But we also turned to scriptures as a way of helping you with that. Can you share with the listeners maybe some of the scriptures that you found helpful, Blaine?
Well, definitely through our time together. Of course, one of the things I think I brought up was the book of Job, which we went through a little bit, and Job helped me a lot looking at his life. Psalm 40, I think it was, Michael?
Psalm 40, verse 5, which says, Many, Lord my God, are the wonders you have done, the things you plan for us. None can compare with you. Were I to speak and tell of your deeds, they would be too many to declare.
Yeah, and when we went through that, you had me go home and make a list of the blessings that God has given me and the blessings I had in my life. And I did that, and as I was doing it, the list got larger and larger and larger and larger. And I've actually kept it on my computer because it's so many. And sometimes when I have bad days or bad events or the case, I'll go back to that and just read over that. And it's just part of the work we've done together that I keep and maintain, just like the thought record. Also, when I was going through the panic and the anxiety attack, I was led to Isaiah 41, verse 10. And in that, it's God speaking. It says, don't be afraid, I'm with you. Do not be dismayed, for I'm your God. I will strengthen you. I will help you. I will uphold you with my victorious right hand. I memorized that, and every time there was a downturn, I stopped myself with what I was doing, and I would repeat that to myself, a lot of times out loud, too.
Right.
Just so I could hear it.
So you use that scripture in Isaiah 41:10 as a way of reminding yourself not to be negative in that.
Definitely, yes.
And to counteract the negative
and
thoughts.
to rely on God.
Yes.
That He was there, because when I was in my negative patterns, I have a tendency to, let God sit in the waiting room.
That's a very powerful principle that you have just explained there, because if we were to think, Blaine, about the temptations of Christ, I know a lot of times when people think of the temptations of Christ, they think in terms of some sinister being, which is the devil with two horns and a fork, appearing to him and tempting him to turn stones into bread and to jump from the pinnacle of the temple and so forth, and to worship the devil. But literally, I think a realistic way of looking at that is that the devil tempted Jesus through his thoughts. And what Jesus did in his temptations were similar to what you are using Isaiah 41:10 to do, because you are using that scripture as a way of refuting the negative thoughts that that are coming to your mind, in the same way that Jesus used other scriptures to counteract the negative things that the devil were bringing to his mind. So Blaine, there are some significant changes that have taken place in your life as a result of the work we have done. Can you tell the listeners out there what are some of the changes that are very profound in your life today?
Well, I don't automatically think negative. And if I do, I have a formula now, with the help of you, Michael,
right,
that can help me get through it. I just want to go back just a bit about what you were talking about Jesus and the devil. It's so very important not to walk away from your Bible and not to walk away from prayer, because I had a habit of doing that as soon as I got negative, and to walk away from, maybe you miss a week of church, 2 weeks of church, 3 weeks of church, and the people that surround you in church, because these are the people that they may say one thing that God gives them to say. And the Word of God and prayer is a must. And when I talked about putting God in the waiting room, that's what we do. He doesn't do that. We do that. And it's important for us that when we go through that, to say, no, you come and help me, and you can have it. You deal with it.
Right.
It's otherwise it just snowballs. It can snowball. Getting back to your question, more positive. I'm not going to say I'm the most positive guy in the world without question.
Well, you're a lot more positive than you were before.
I'm very, things, and it helps things immensely. The people around me, the relationships, just making decisions on things. I was able to get through a big life transition this year, just using some of the techniques that you had shown me, which would have been harder 2-3 years ago. Since we've seen each other last spring, I retired, I moved, we sold a house, I moved to Perth and retired, and so those were big events, and that would have been far more stressful and far more tedious and hard if I had have been thinking negative constantly through that whole ordeal. So
you gave away your age a little bit there by talking about your retirement. Yes. I didn't want to say it, but I'm glad that you brought it up, because I think it raises a very important point, that it doesn't matter how long you have been along a negative path, there is always the opportunity to change. So for a very significant number of years, you were living in this pathway where you were tending to think negatively about situation. I remember the first time you came in, you were a bit skeptical that change could be achieved. But praise be to God that where you are today, it's a lot different place than you were when you came to see me. You talked about the depths of depression, Blaine, that you would be in those early days. And the fact that you still get a little negative sometimes today, but it's not anywhere near where it was. Can you elaborate on that a little bit for the sake of the listener? Let me just,
sure.
Before you go into that, let me just say, if you're just joining us, I am Michael Hart, and you're listening to the Life Transformation radio show. It's an Elim radio show, and with me in studio today is Blaine Bender, who is sharing his remarkable story of how God has changed his life from being a very negative and pessimistic person to be a person now who has more hope about the future and a more balanced outlook in life. So go ahead, Blaine.
I just wanted to mention that you were talking about how through my depression. First, I'll touch on that. My depression. I was never suicidal, but I would end up staying in bed for 2 and 3 days at a time, and it would be a point where I wouldn't want to do anything, or it was completely black. It's hard to explain to anybody who's never experienced it, to be honest with you. But I did want to bring out, and I didn't mention this at the beginning, in my family, even growing up as a Christian, nobody in my family was going to church. My wife wasn't a Christian. My daughters, I didn't take them to church. I didn't. I was the only one attending church, and through all this, I have to say now, literally everybody in my family, my oldest daughter, her husband, her 3 children, my youngest daughter, her husband, and my wife, we're all born again Christians now, living. Yeah.
Yes.
And part of it is God used what I went through. So he can use the bad just as he can use the good.
Absolutely.
Without question. And don't ever think he can't.
Absolutely.
So that's what when I look back on it, I see the life that was, but how God used it.
Talking about God bringing beauty out of the ashes.
Yes.
Your life story is a very good example of that. Your entire family is now serving God, and you were touching on the darkness of your depression, and how does that compare to where you are today?
Okay, well, I haven't lied in bed and been in bed for depression in 2 or 3 years.
Okay.
So easily. It's where it used to be maybe at the height, it probably would easily be a couple times a month.
Okay, so we have to give God praise for that.
Yes.
That's quite a change. So you have had over the last 2 or so years a very steady time of very, no depression and very more positive outlook about life. So, Blaine, you mentioned a number of things in talking about your situation. And one thing that I wanted to touch on and elaborate on a little bit more is the fact that when people are feeling down, sometimes there is this tendency to withdraw from others, to stop attending church. And you were saying that one thing that you have found helpful over the last little while is to keep going to church, not to isolate yourself. If you're out there today and you're struggling with depression or going through anything in your life, I would just like to encourage you that one big step that you can take to make yourself better is not to give in to the feeling that you might have to isolate yourself, to make sure that you meet with God's people on a regular basis, to make sure that you interact with others, and by so doing, that is one of the big steps that can help to get you out of that depression or whatever you're going through. Blaine, why don't you talk a little bit about generally where your life is now, but also where you are spiritually as a believer today compared to when I saw you?
Well, recently my wife and I moved to a small town just outside of Ottawa, and that's where both my daughters are with their husbands and children. My mother's there, and my mother-in-law's there, and that's basically my whole family. So it's just... I can't tell you how enjoyable it is. We're within walking distance of each other.
You're a blessed man.
Yeah, very blessed man. Yeah, and it's I walk the dog at night and it brings tears to my eyes because I can't believe how blessed it is. I am, our whole family. And spiritually, I have been for about the past 3 years praying for some leading in what I'm going to do after retirement. So far, I haven't received anything, but that's okay. I don't mind that. If God just wants me to sit and build snowmen with my grandchildren, I'm very happy with that. And if he just wants me to take care of my family, I'm very happy with that too. So I'm attending a small church in Perth where we live, and it's a very quiet, it's a nice life.
Blaine, I'm so happy to hear about the peaceful state where you are in your life today. I know God has blessed you and blessed your family, and how he's helping you to take life one day at a time and not to worry about the unknown things of the future. Unfortunately, we have come to the end of today's broadcast, and Blaine, I want to thank you very much for joining us today on Life Transformation and for sharing your inspiring story with us. I'm sure your story will be a source of hope and encouragement to others. You have been listening to Blaine Bender's testimony of how God used counseling to help change his life from one where the future held a lot of doom and gloom to one where he's now positive and trusting God who holds his future in his hands. So if you're just joining us, I'm Michael Hart of Elim Counseling Services, and you've been listening to the Life Transformation radio show. My friend, if you're struggling with an issue today, it could be depression, it could be other challenges in life, maybe it's grief, whatever you are going through, I would like you to know that help is just a call away. You can call Elim Counseling Services at 613-699-1677, or you can contact me by email at mhart@elimcounselingministry.com. We also have a female counselor on staff. If you would like to speak to someone else, we are able to assist you. You have been listening to this program, and we have been discussing this issue of depression, and negative thinking. But if there's any issue that you would like to hear addressed on this show, you can send me an email again at mhart, MHART, at Elim, ELIMCOUNSELLING ministry.com, and I'll be happy to deal with your topic or your question on the show. I'm also encouraging you, my guests, my listeners, to stay tuned next week when Leon and Helen Chartland will be sharing their story of how God used counseling to bring their marriage back from the brink of divorce. Thank you very much for listening to this edition of Life Transformation and Elim Counseling Service radio show. Until next time, this is your host, Michael Hart, praying that God would grant you happiness in all your relationships and keep you sound in mind and pure in heart. God bless you, and take care until next time.